Alrighty, let's take a look at this War of the Triple Alliance, or the Triple Alliance War, depending on who you want to trust, the rules or the magazine cover. Different names, BGG uses this one, whatever. Alright, let me touch on components first, just because. So you got your kind of glossy, somewhat ineffectual counters. They're hard to read. Some of the numbers are hard to see on them. The little flag in the corner is almost pointless, but was kind of confusing when I first saw it. I'd see something like this and think, what? They have torpedoes or something? What's going on with that? The graphics are not inspiring. I can't say that I particularly like the graphical presentation on the counters. They're barely functional, though. Once you kind of recognize the graphics, you can see what the movement allowance on the cab is, and you can recognize, okay, that's not a 6, it's a 16. Okay, there's a 1 defense on those artillery units that I couldn't see. Stuff like that, which is hard to realize at first. So, for example, I thought there was only 1 number on the artillery at the beginning of the when I first looked at it. The map, I've mentioned before, nice big hexes, very functional, not terribly attractive, but not, you know, not unattractive either. I see nothing wrong with it. You got your player aids up here, not the best place in the world for them, but it's a magazine game. What do you want? You know, they're trying to print it on a basic map size. They've got the extra space rather than putting a player aid in or something, which you can't really expect. The rules are crappy. They're not terrible because it's a very simple game, but they're bloated beyond belief. They have to be at least twice as big as they need to be, and I find them hard to access because they don't have the kind of distinguishment between, well, between different cases the way the old S&Ts used to, and they don't have a distinguishment that's particularly useful between what's an example and what's not. It's just kind of written kind of the way I talk, you know. It's like, here's what you do. For example, you do that, all as part of the rules. It's really horrible. But they're also not terribly bad rules. They do note that they do push the design notes into an italic font and make them clear and stand out. So at least there's that. But otherwise, and you know, it's kind of funny, over on BGG, the design credits go to Ty Bamba, however, along with Javier Romero, but Bamba's listed as a developer here. I don't know, you know, what they decide. I think it's kind of along the lines of they decided to give design credits to developers in a lot of cases. I don't know who makes that decision and who doesn't over on BGG. But very clearly there's no development credits at BGG, and there should be because there are several games. Any complex game really has a developer and really should have a developer. Anything else I wanted to touch on here? Yeah, okay. So this game gets a lot of flack in terms of bad comments. It doesn't have a terribly high rating. I'm not going to be boosting its rating much. I'm going to be giving it slightly above the average that they give. But people who normally give higher ratings to these games have given this a poor rating for a couple of reasons. And I can understand some of them. Some of them I disagree with more fundamentally. So one of them is on the play side of things. You have this terribly painful attrition table. And that is just a pain in the ass. And a lot of people aren't going to like seeing their units dissolve. From a historical standpoint, I can say to you, well, units tend to dissolve. Not whole units necessarily, but forces suffer significant attrition rates in the field. Most games just kind of represent that by saying, well, your units are there, and these are your historical designations, and the units are still there, and maybe they take partial losses or something. In this, instead, what they've decided is to kind of abstract some of that away and show you the real percentage of losses that you're taking. And that's particularly important in this case because the historical loss rates were tremendous. For the Alliance, it looks like it's about 50%. For Paraguay itself, there's people who claim up to 90% of the entire population of Paraguay was wiped out in this war. That's probably unreasonable. But the military was just destroyed. And that wasn't mainly due to casualties. It was mainly due to the cholera epidemic, poor sanitation in the camps, just desertions, and then the countryside getting wiped out, people emigrating away, etc. The country was just, depopulated during this war, and certainly the military dissolved within the first few years. The military for the Paraguayans was exceedingly devoted to the fight, though. At least in terms of them being able to mobilize a huge army in comparison to the size of the population itself. How much of that just dissolved, how much of it, actually died, or were actual casualties is, up for debate. But certainly these attrition results actually seem very reasonable. There is a reasonable complaint, I believe, about the combat results table. I understand there's a fixed combat result table. I'm perfectly happy by getting rid of those ones in the corners and putting zeros in there, because that just prevents ridiculous tactics. Maybe the combat result table needed a smoothing out overall. I didn't look to see how good the eventual one is. I'm pretty happy with it. It's a kind of interesting results table. Odds-based, but with a lot of differentiation because of the big D10 on it. You can look at the 1-to-1, and it runs from 4 losses to the 4-to-1 losses, attacker to defender, up to 1-to-6. Now, why is the attacker benefited by these? Well, I don't know that they really are. They just have a more of a possibility of an extreme result on the high end if they've got quality, better supplies, etc., that they're likely to get on that high end. Because chances are the defender has terrain advantages which will prevent those high-end results from coming into play. They also possibly have a better supply situation, although what I've found is that the attacker can actually interfere with the defender's supply pretty easily. What that means is another thing people didn't like. I saw one comment about, this shouldn't be a game about, long-range cav raids. Yeah, it probably shouldn't. Why? Because you probably should have your army stretched out along your supply line, garrisoning it. These hexes are fairly big. If you look at the scale, they're, 15.5 miles wide each. The units are tiny. The units are battalion-sized for the most part. Well, putting a battalion every 15 miles along your primary supply route, that does not sound unreasonable for a Civil War era force. You have to remember that other than Sherman's march, most Civil War armies that were penetrating enemy territory had to maintain a humongous supply network that was garrisoned by large portions of their force. Often half the force was defending the supply source. That's what you got to do here. Does that still prevent a cav raid? No, and it didn't in the Civil War either. Is it the terrible thing? Well, you don't have to attack. You don't have to be flung so far forward, or you can position your units around the enemy and surround him in a way that he can't get out. All of these things are possibilities, and that adds to kind of the play puzzle to all this. I can understand not liking the attrition table. I can understand not enjoying the type of play that this game presents, but I think in a lot of ways it's actually very historical, what it does provide. Maybe not entirely. Maybe the attacker has a little bit of an advantage that I think goes beyond what probably should happen, mainly because, yes, they can bludgeon their way into cutting your supply line and then destroy you that way. It feels a little bit too, especially with the 3 combat rounds, where you could really like cut your way through the enemy's forces. But those things as a play design, they provide a type of challenge that I haven't seen in another game. So this is a very very unique type of design. All right, what else was there that was against it? Can't really think of anything. So overall, you know, I don't think this is a fantastic game, and I'm not convinced that it's absolutely historically, you know, the last word that could be made on this war. But it does provide you with an interesting framework, and I think one that focuses on certain different factors than most war games do. And that's kind of a turn-off to the person who expects their magazine game to be kind of vanilla. I kind of like that it's not. I kind of like the differences that it presents. I'm not sure how to fix the flaws that I might see. That becomes more difficult because it's not as, you know, standard a design. But I can see ways around that, you know, like changing the combat results table slightly. Some other ones become more difficult, though. For example, how much of your force you're going to have to devote to your supply tail. That may be a little bit overboard. Other than that, I should talk about the magazine itself, because I've been looking at a few S&Ts recently, but I want to look at this one in particular, the same way that I did with, what was it, the Right Fierce and Terrible, which is, I don't remember what company that was, but anyway. The level of, I don't know, critical work in the different articles feels less than the old S&Ts. It does not feel up to snuff for what I'd expect for these magazines. Of course, I don't know, you know, whether the money's available for these kind of things or not. But one of the things these do is they present you with a nice, well, here's the Nafi one that looks interesting. I don't remember what it was. Cordoba, the Spanish Master General. So, my feeling overall, another one, Middle Age Warfare, it felt more sketchy than what I've seen in earlier magazines. But there's also more meat here. You're getting a 60-page magazine. Now, I don't know how much the magazine alone goes for. I'm sure there's an ad in here. But it's significantly less than the magazine with the game. And you're getting at least some good articles in here. You're also getting some that I feel weren't done at the level of not just the historical research, but maybe the choices of what to highlight and what to show to the reader. One of the problems, though, is a lot of this is already covered ground. Obviously not the Paraguay War, but, for example, this Fall of France, Myths and Reality. You know, that's ground that's been covered before, so they've got to try to reach for a new hook to represent this kind of discussion. And I found this an interesting discussion, for example, but not one that particularly fit the title Myths and Reality. It felt like, okay, you know, there's this sort of accepted, received wisdom about it, perhaps, and yes, the author shows some points where that doesn't really apply as in quite as clear a way as you'd think it would. But in almost all the cases that he brings out, there's kind of there's a kernel of truth to that. myth side of things, right? And then there's kind of a, okay, well, how much is that the key factor? But there wasn't really any, for example, in something like that, there's not going to be any kind of real blockbuster new revelation in there. This is not, you know, your modern historian magazine. It's might be relying on some more modern history, but this isn't the magazine you're going to turn to for probably your best modern military history. I don't know what is. Maybe people can advise me on that, especially for some of the stuff that's you know, not World War II. And maybe they get better stuff in their World War II magazine in terms of that. It's probably pretty decent because it's giving this kind of broad panoply of the military history that I don't know that I doubt anything else would. You know, unless you're following the historical theses that are being put out every year on your particular area of interest. I don't know what you can find better than this. But yeah, with World War II, that comb has been run through the hair so many times that, you know, my feeling is Wargaming should just kind of put World War II aside and say we've done way too much on that, unless somebody has something really innovative. And there have been innovative designs, there's no question, and innovative looks at the history or new factors that have to be brought out. And likewise with this, this is an almost unknown war, so it's interesting to most of us. So it's interesting to see that the historical analysis on it, but I felt like it was a little weaker, at least on the main article. Those are the two articles that I reread recently, and you know, I see Nafi's name on here, and I largely trust his writing to generally be at a high level at which I'm not going to get anything new, but fairly well written and researched. So I have a certain level of belief that he's providing something that's going to be fun to read, but probably not going to give you much more than you could find elsewhere. Obviously here, though, a discussion on Cordoba, that's going to be you know, more in depth than probably just a couple of pages than probably most people are going to run into, and then some future capabilities stuff. So overall, you know, I think you're getting as good a magazine as the old one. It's just slightly different. There's, you know, more in it, but some of that more may not be up to the higher standard that maybe you expect. I don't know. The game itself, though, was not bad for a magazine game at all. You know, I would probably say people might be disappointed. This would probably be on kind of that, if it was released as a boxed game, it would be in the sale bin within a couple of years. You know, it's not the kind of thing that's going to sell out. But then again, that's part of what S&T is trying to do, I think, is provide this kind of new looks at things that aren't getting a lot of looks at them. And that makes me very happy. Especially makes me happy to see that they've pulled the World War II out of S&T itself. And I'm actually, you know, contemplating a subscription. The problem with that is, you know what? As long as I've got Consim Expo near me, I can go there and rifle through people's stuff and pick up all the S&Ts that they didn't get around to playing or played there once or twice at a significant discount. You know, this this ran what, $23.99 with the game. That's the you know, the bookseller's price, the MSRP. So I would guess you're probably, given the deals that I've seen on these mags, I would guess you're not paying too much less than that for a subscription. You're probably getting maybe one magazine for free. So you're paying probably about $100 for a subscription. Now that means that used, I can pick these up for, you know, I can pick up probably the whole year for $30, right? Well, maybe not. maybe the most popular game in it is not going to sell for much less than the MSRP. But I've found that these are available to me. They may not be available on eBay that cheap, though. So unless you have that kind of availability where you can just hunt and pick. But my guess is that most of them will go down in price to probably $10 plus shipping. You're looking at about $15 a mag. So unless you need to get it right away because your game collection is just too small, and I really doubt most S&T subscribe. The other side of it, though, is supporting the hobby and making sure this thing gets published. And, you know, that's kind of tempting. We'll see after I look at a few more of them how I feel about it, because I got a whole pile of them baked up. And I would hate to see, you know, the magazine go under. So to that extent, maybe I'll make the decision to help fund them. It's hard to pay 4 or 5 times as much, though. All right, let's send it up.